So today we're going to go through start making a fire in the woods, what you would need to collect in order to make a fire, and then we're going to cook on that fire and have some lunch. So first I'm going to get some birch bark. I'm going to get white birch. There's some yellow birch around here too, and we'll use that as our fire starter. So I'll collect some of that here. One thing with birch trees you want to make sure is I always like to find one that's got lots of extra stuff already falling off. Some people will cut the birch tree, and if you do that and you do it around the whole circumference of the tree, you can actually destroy it, because then it can't do whatever it is it needs to do to live. So, well, this will light very easily. This stuff would light with a match or lighter, no problem, to get the fire going, so that you can get your small kindling or small pieces of wood to start to burn, so then you can get bigger pieces to start to burn. Yeah, it's sort of like nature's newspaper. For those who are at all familiar with making fires, people often just light newspaper, or they used to. This is a natural version of that. Okay, so that would be, I'm quite sure, white birch. So very flammable, and a handful of that should start the fire up pretty good. So now I'll move on and get some small pieces of wood, and that is the next step, because that should light pretty easily with the birch bark to get a base fire going. So I'm just going to head over here and start collecting some of that. Of course, I'm using my Fiskars axe today. I've been using this for a number of years. Works good. So now I just get some small stuff, break it down a little bit, and I'll collect a bunch of that. A good place to get this, and in one of our videos we're going to talk about the difference between the types of trees out here in the maritime forest, but in softwoods, the base of softwood trees, I'll show you here, there's often a lot of dead brush on the underside of the trees. So it's dead, it's dry, and it's usually fairly protected from the elements because of the tree above it. So you're not damaging the tree, and it's quite easy to collect. So I'll just go around and collect a bunch of that. I'll cut a little from each tree, trying not to take too much from any individual tree, because even though these are dead, it doesn't mean they don't serve some purpose. Depends what you're doing with the fire. Like the amount I've got right now will certainly be enough to get the fire started and going, but I'm going to need some more to be able to cook on. So one thing I've learned is you don't need the fire, well, you don't need it to be too big in terms of height, but you also don't need it to be too big in terms of the footprint it leaves on the ground, because if you're cooking, the most you can really cook is the frying pan you're using, or the piece of meat you're grilling. So the fire really doesn't need to be that large, and that also makes for a much smaller footprint. Sometimes I'll bring a sled with me, like a pull sled, just a kid sled with a rope to pull behind me to load all this on, but today I'm just going to do it by hand. I probably have enough now to get the fire started, and then if I need to get more I can come collect more. So we'll head back and get the fire going. So I found a fairly good spot here to make the fire. Now this is just a fire to cook lunch on. If you're really setting up a camp, you might want to find a more sheltered area or whatever, but this would be a good enough spot for lunch. So I don't have a shovel. You could shovel out a place. Sometimes I'll just pack the snow down as much as I can. So I'll use my snowshoes here. The fire will gradually drop in the snow I'm not too concerned about that today. And then it's always nice to pack down another area to keep your wood so you don't get that lost in the snow. Something like that. And I'll store my wood over here. Take off my snowshoes. Hopefully I don't sink too far in the snow. A little bit, but that's okay. Get my axe out. So next I'm just going to use my wood pile to break off a bunch of small pieces that I'm going to use to actually start the fire. So these will be the smallest kind of ends and tops and pieces that I collected, which usually will light up pretty good. And we'll talk about what species of tree in other videos have different advantages for fires, but in general just the softwoods seem to burn pretty good, and there's lots of them around here. As you get a fire going, hardwood tends to, I find, burn hotter and last a bit longer. So one thing you can see here, I'm sort of stripping off the small branches off of some of the larger branches and then keeping the larger branch for later. So I'll just start a little pile here of small pieces that I'll use for the fire. Might be enough to get started. There's lots of ways to start a fire. Probably as many ways as there are people who've started fires, but I'm just going to put the birch bark in the middle. You can be really particular about how you do this and make a perfect kind of teepee structure, which works well, which is roughly what I'm doing, but I'm just sort of spreading the stuff around, but having it kind of centered on top of the birch bark pile. But I usually carry a couple of lighters and a couple of boxes of matches with me. So these are just from a store in Canada called Canadian Tire. They're waterproof matches, so these could get wet. And they have a kind of a wax tip on the top. So light them. And then we light the birch bark in a few different places to kind of get it going. Carefully, don't burn your fingers. I might only need one match on this. We'll see. Birch bark's nice. It burns well, but it burns quick, but not terribly quick. So you actually can keep some heat on your wood, which is nice because sometimes, even though the stuff I'm getting is fairly dry, it still has some water in it for sure. And then as it's burning, what I like to do is just keep putting on the small pieces. And after a while, you start to get an ear for a fire. So when your wood starts to catch, you'll hear a crackling sound. And that's always nice to hear. What I do is add small pieces on where it seems to be the fire's going the best. What you're looking for here is at the end of the process is to have a fire that is what we call rip roaring, and that would mean that the fire is going so well that you could cook on it, you can heat yourself up, you can really look after your needs, and we call that a rip roaring fire. So that's what we're looking for here today. I mean, I've heard it said that you can pack the snow down and it's not a big problem because the water will just push through the snow down to the bottom, but I think over time this will hollow out an area. It's never put out the fire, in my experience, but what it does do, like I've had multi-day trips where we've had a campsite and eventually the fire's down on the ground, but you have these ice walls going into the fireplace. So you got to be careful of that, because when you step on those ice walls, you slide right down towards the fire. It's starting to go a little bit, so I'm adding some of the bigger pieces on. What I'm trying to get is for all these smaller pieces of wood to start to burn down and then have kind of a good bed of coals, which are relatively burnt wood that's hot and holding a lot of heat, because then you can get a little more uniform temperature. And I'll show you, I usually will transition the fire. Right now I'm doing sort of a modified teepee where I'm stacking things on top of the central hot point. Once I've done that and the wood's burned good, I'll actually put the wood all in linear lines, because I find it burns a little slower and you can control the heat a little better. But I want to get the fire going a bit better before I move to that point. The old timers used to say that smoke follows beauty. So if you have a group of people around the fire and someone's complaining about the smoke going towards them, you can tell them that to make them feel better about things. So now what I'm doing is I'm laying the wood a little more in line, I guess, or instead of crossing over in line, because I find that'll control the fire, control the flame. The wood will burn a bit slower, the temperature control is a little better, and it makes it a lot better to cook on. Once we get going here, today we're going to cook some hamburgers. We prepared them earlier in the cabin down the trail a ways from here, but we brought them with us, and we're going to cook them up on a cast iron frying pan that we also brought with us. So she's starting to rip, at least. Hopefully we'll get her rip roaring here soon. One of the great feelings of being around a fire is when you get smoke in your eyes, and you'll all of a sudden have this rush of pain's not the right word, but something, and then your eyes start to water. But if you just hold it out, it actually feels pretty good afterwards. You get your eyes flushed out, and it's not bad. So that looks like that's going to burn pretty good. We got a fair amount of wood left, which should be enough to cook on. So now I'm going to get the food out. So I'll just go through what I'm using for cooking supplies. Got this old grill here, and that's good. Multi-purpose. You can cook, with a pan or something on top of it, but you can also put food inside of it, shut it, and use that to keep it closed, so you can flip things, kind of barbecue style. So we got second frying pan here is kind of an enamel one that I brought some onions that we're going to use to cook up on our burgers. We're going to make some caramelized onions. And so what I'm actually going to try to cook today, I'm going to prepare some burgers with some meat from the market, just garlic and onions and a little bit of mustard mixed in there, and we're going to try to fry them up on a frying pan here on the fire today. So I'm just going to, you can see the fire now, I put some more wood on. I'm going to let that burn down a little bit so I get some coals, and then we should be able to get cooking. And I'm sitting on my snowshoes, which is important to sit on something, because you don't want to sit in the cold snow. Get cold. So got a little oil here. I'm going to put that on my frying pan. And then I'll put a little more oil with the onions. Now this grate sits in my cabin all year, which is fine, but I always make sure to burn it pretty good before I get started. There's two ways to cook with this grill, several ways, but you can do it like this, but if you need a big cooking surface, you can open it right up. Now I get two frying pans here today, so I'm probably going to open it up and kind of have one as my main heat, and one is just to keep things warm over there. Again, leather gloves are nice. They don't tend to burn. I mean, they will if it's really hot, but they're my favorite. And then what I'll be able to do if I want to put wood on the fire is I can just lift that up. Throw a couple burgers on. Using my Coleman spatula from Canadian Tire. I've had this for years. Just a little more oil on there, maybe. Might fold that back up just to give me a little more of a gap there, because one of the hard things to do on a campfire is regulate your heat. Some people would say there's maybe too much flame here and I should wait, but and we'll eat off that, but also I use it to keep sparks and stuff off the burgers and just to regulate the temperature there a little better too. And at home you might time this. Here you kind of just have to get a feel for how long you need to cook things. Your handle sometimes will get pretty hot. Just put some snow on it. And you got to add more wood to the fire. Back on track now. So sometimes when you're flipping them, you gotta get your head close to the fire. So we'll flip them and see what they look like. Not bad, not bad. Hard to tell how they're doing on the inside, but I find if you keep something over the top, it does control the temperature a little better. Fire's down a little. We'll get her going. Nice. So these are coming pretty wood now. It can be a little tricky to tend the fire while you're cooking, but it's not too bad. This grill I'm able to just flip it up and add some wood, or flip it up from the other side and add some wood. So I'm going to caramelize these onions. Just brought some maple sugar, so we're just going to sprinkle some of that on. Got a fresh bun here. So we'll just slice that. And we'll try to toast it up just a little here. These should be pretty well done. And then I just bring a mix of mayo and mustard here. Pop a little bit of that on. Use my plate that I was using for cooking. Grab a burger. Pop that on top. We'll take a little bit of onion here. Throw that on my burger. And just like that, about 30 minutes, we've got a nice, locally made, local ingredients. And we'll see how it tastes. Great. Just to show you, within less than an hour, you can go out in the woods, collect the products you need to make a fire, low to zero impact on the environment, cook up something real nice, and you can do this all alone if you need to, or you can bring friends and enjoy it as well. So I'm going to stop now, have some lunch, and we'll see you next time.